There is a strange moment that most people experience, but rarely name correctly. The moment you realize that you are tired of always having to explain yourself so others can feel comfortable. Tired of shrinking your emotions, smoothing out your thoughts, and performing in ways that fit the image others expect. What exhausts you is not life itself. It is the constant need to prove that you are harmless. Then, one very quiet day, you stop doing it. You stop justifying a very small, very real emotion. You simply pause. And strangely enough, the world around you begins to react more strongly than you expected. Those who were used to controlling you with questions become confused. Those who relied on your agreeableness begin to lose their grip. And you realize, silence too has weight. In Jungian psychology, every major change begins with very small movements inside. When you stop explaining, you are not just changing the way you speak, you are changing the structure of power within yourself. In today's video, we will explore the psychological mechanism behind the reflex to explain why it drains you and what truly happens when you stop. Stay until the end, because you may realize this. You do not need many words to change your life. Sometimes, you only need silence at the right moment. Are you ready to see what happens when you stop explaining? Number 1. Explaining is not communication, but a survival reflex. There is a strange moment that all of us have experienced, but rarely name correctly. It is the moment when you are having a normal conversation with someone, without being questioned or doubted, and suddenly, you hear yourself explaining. You explain why you did not reply to a message right away. You explain why you are a bit quiet today. You explain why you want to leave early, why you do not like something, why you need space for yourself. No one asked, no one demanded it, no one required you to justify yourself. And yet the explanation flows out automatically, as if you owe the world a presentation just to be allowed to exist. And it is precisely in this unconscious moment that Carl Jung recognized a profound truth. Most of the time, human explaining is not communication. It is a survival reflex. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." If you pay attention, you will notice that explanations often appear faster than your thoughts. Before you can ask yourself, "Do I need to say this?" your body has already acted. Your voice has already spoken. The justification has already left your mouth. Just as when you touch something hot and your hand instantly pulls away without any conscious command, the need to explain activates to protect you from a threat your mind has not yet identified. And what is interesting is this: in most cases, that threat does not actually exist. It is merely imagined by the body and reacted to out of habit. I have a friend who sends long messages, almost a full paragraph every time she is 5 minutes late. Not because anyone demands or scolds her, but because inside her body there is always a feeling that if she does not explain, something bad will happen. She will be misunderstood, judged, seen through an unfriendly lens. Yet no one has ever said those things to her. Still, her body reacts as if they were true. Jung wrote that the human body carries far more psychological memory than we realize. The act of explaining sometimes does not come from thought, but from the automatic response of the nervous system, a response meant to keep you safe, avoid danger, and soothe an invisible fear. Imagine walking through a forest at dusk. Every small sound makes you flinch. even though rationally you know there is not always a predator. The body does not need real evidence to react. It only needs a sensation. And for many people, social interaction is like that forest. A look, a pause, an unreadable expression is enough to trigger the reflex to explain. Not because they want to talk more, but because the nervous system sends a signal. Do something to be safer. And so the explanation appears as a way to calm oneself. And the more you observe yourself, the clearer this becomes. You explain even when you are confused. You explain when you think you might be bothering someone. You explain when you change a small plan. You explain when you need rest. You explain when you do not have the energy to continue a conversation. These words are not spoken to share, but to protect, to prevent a negative outcome the body imagines. As if you are constantly submitting a safety report just to maintain your place in other people's eyes. According to Jung, people are not afraid of the truth. They are afraid of what they imagine others' reactions to the truth will be. This is precisely why explaining becomes automatic. It is not meant to clarify. It is meant to soothe an inner fear. And when you see this, you realize an important truth. The problem is not other people, but the unconscious reflex that is governing you. What is interesting is that when you begin to view explaining through the lens of a survival reflex, you stop blaming yourself for talking too much, being too sensitive, or needing to be understood. You begin to see that your body is doing its job, protecting you. It is not wrong. It is simply no longer appropriate, because adult reality is no longer the environment in which this reflex was formed. But your body does not know that yet. It still thinks you are in danger, and every explanation is like a temporary shield, an invisible layer of protection you have used for so long that you did not even realize you could live without it anymore. If you have ever noticed yourself caught in this loop of explaining, share a small moment in the comments. No need for a long story, just one situation where you realized your body reacted before your mind. Perhaps your experience will help someone else feel a little less alone on this journey. Number 2. The root wound, when emotions are stripped of legitimacy. And when you begin to realize that explaining is not a choice but a reflex, a natural question arises. Where does this reflex come from? Because no one is born knowing how to justify every emotion and every small movement. A 3-year-old child does not stand in front of a mirror asking, "Do I need to explain why I am sad?" No. They cry when sad, laugh when happy, run toward a hug when they want one, and leave when they feel unsafe. Every emotion has the right to exist before it is named, which means that at some point, someone made them believe that what they felt was no longer valid. And from that moment, the need to explain was planted in the human psyche like an invisible seed. Most of our deepest psychological patterns do not appear in adulthood. They are formed when we are too young to understand what is happening. A child says they are sad and hears, "What is there to be sad about?" They say they are afraid and receive, "You're big now, don't overreact." They say they are angry and are stopped with a look, "Be good, don't be rude." Each time, a small piece of emotion is stripped of legitimacy. Not through violence, but through denial. Not through shouting, but through the implicit message. What you feel is not worthy of acceptance. And when this happens repeatedly, the child learns a lesson they do not even realize they have learned. If they want their emotions to be considered real, they must explain them. Explain carefully. Explain logically. Explain in a way that adults will believe. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And part of that unlived life is the emotions parents do not know how to process, which they unconsciously pass on to their children through denial, control, or minimization. The child, in order to survive in that emotional environment, must adapt. They begin to observe every facial expression, every shift in an adult's tone of voice. They learn to adjust themselves to fit expectations. And from there, the need to explain is no longer just speech, it becomes a survival strategy. On a business trip, I once met a young woman who spoke about her childhood with a sad smile. Whenever she cried because classmates teased her, her mother did not hold her or ask questions, but simply said, "Don't let people see you being weak like that." On the surface, it sounded like advice, but beneath it was a message the child understood clearly. Your emotions make others uncomfortable. It is better not to show them. And to avoid being seen as weak, the girl began to hide her real feelings. And whenever she could not hide them, she had to explain. "I'm not sad, I'm just a bit tired. I'm not angry, I'm just overthinking. I'm not scared, I'm just a little worried." All of these explanations were not meant to help others understand, but to ask permission to feel. A child whose emotions are denied is like someone standing in the rain who must constantly explain why they are wet, even though getting wet in the rain is entirely natural. When emotions are stripped of legitimacy, the child no longer trusts the obvious truth of their own experience. And so people grow up with a powerful but unconscious belief. Their emotions only have value if others agree. This is not a belief of the intellect, but of the body. It is learned through repeated experiences at a time when the child has no language to object, no concept of emotional rights, no understanding that what they feel is valid from the start. They know only one thing: to avoid being denied, mocked, punished, or abandoned, they must explain. And gradually, explaining becomes the way they ask permission to exist. When you understand this, you see that the need to explain is not a personality trait, not weakness, and certainly not a bad habit. It is the trace of a child who was taught that the world was not wide enough to hold their real emotions. And you will understand why, as an adult, a slight frown, a moment of silence, or someone turning away just a little can instantly activate the old reflex in your body. Because that reflex was not formed through reason, but through fear. Not through clear memory, but through emotional memory. And that is precisely where the collapse of inner authority begins, which we will enter in the next section. Number 3. The collapse of inner authority. When we understand that the need to explain originates from moments when emotions were stripped of legitimacy, we move to a deeper level that Carl Jung considered essential to understanding why people constantly justify themselves: the collapse of inner authority. This is the psychological foundation that forces a person to explain every emotion, every thought, every small action, not because they want to, but because they have lost the ability to trust their own subjective experience. And it is at this breaking point that Jung said, only when a person stops explaining does their life change, because they no longer live from others' perspectives, but return to living from their inner center. He wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." But how can someone look into their own heart when they have been taught that what they feel is not worthy of trust? Inner authority, according to Jung, is not rigidity or superficial power. It is the capacity to recognize that inner experience has inherent value. It is the ability to say, "I feel this, therefore this is real for me," without asking permission. When this authority is intact, people do not need to explain in order to exist. But when it collapses, every emotion must pass inspection. Everything they do must first make sense to others before it makes sense to themselves. And this is the root of compulsive explaining. Because inner emotion is no longer sufficient proof, they must seek external validation to legitimize it. In a Jungian therapy session, a young man once shared that he constantly asks his friends whether his choices are okay. A cafe, an outfit, a small plan. The issue was not the triviality, but his inability to trust any of his own feelings. When I asked, "So what do you actually want?" he replied, "I have a feeling, but I don't trust it." This is the clearest expression of collapsed inner authority. Standing in front of one's own emotions and still needing someone else to confirm whether they are allowed to exist. At that point, explaining becomes a defense mechanism, explaining to ask permission, explaining to avoid being wrong. This process is not new. It has been reflected in ancient myths. Cassandra, the Greek prophetess, was granted the ability to see the truth by Apollo, but cursed so that no one would believe her. She did not suffer only because her prophecies were rejected, but because she gradually began to doubt what she herself saw. The tragedy was not that others denied her, it was that she began to deny herself. And when a person no longer trusts their inner truth, they are forced to explain. Explain to be believed. Explain to be allowed to exist. That is the pain of a broken inner authority. In our own psychology, this collapse happens more quietly. No shouting is needed. Just enough times of being told, "Why do you feel that way?" or "You're overreacting," and emotions begin to be questioned. The center of evaluation shifts outward. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" we ask, "What do others think about this feeling?" And from there, explaining becomes the necessary bridge for emotions to exist. Sadly, when inner authority collapses, people not only lose trust in their emotions, but also lose their ability to self-direct. They become someone who waits for feedback, waits for approval to decide whether they are allowed to think, want, or do something. Emotions become drafts needing approval. The self becomes a proposal that must be accepted before it can live authentically. But Jung did not describe this to make us despair. He described it to show that precisely at the point where inner authority collapses, a person has the opportunity to look back. When did they hand over their power of judgment to the outside world? And what happens when they take it back? The spirit of the title lies here. When you stop explaining, everything changes. Because that is the moment you reclaim your ultimate power, the right to trust your real emotions, and to see more clearly what happens when inner authority erodes to the point where you no longer live by your own will. We move to the next section, where you will see why the more you explain, the more you lose ownership of yourself. Number 4. Explaining. A quiet form of self-betrayal. At this point, you will recognize an even subtler truth as you begin to see the collapse of inner authority. Explaining is not only a reflex, but a quiet form of self-betrayal that unfolds in the most ordinary moments of daily life. Not grand betrayals, not life-altering decisions, but the moments when you turn away from your real feelings just to make others more comfortable. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And precisely because self-acceptance is so difficult, we learn to betray ourselves first, through explanations that seem harmless. You say, "I'm fine," while your chest is tight. You say, "I'm not upset," when your throat still burns. You say, "I understand," even though you feel dismissed. These phrases are often light as a passing breeze, but behind them is a small blade you quietly turn toward yourself. Because to say fine, you must temporarily deny what you are actually feeling. That is not kindness, it is abandoning yourself in that moment. I have a friend who once told a story without realizing how painful it truly was. A co-worker spoke harshly to her in a meeting. At lunch, someone asked, "Did something happen this morning? You look a bit sad." She smiled and replied, "I'm fine, just a little tired." But that evening, she sat alone and cried. What hurt her was not the co-worker's words, but the moment she deceived her own feelings. She had stood on the side of others instead of her own. She had explained away her own truth. This behavior is like placing a small bandage over a deep wound. On the outside, it looks fine, but inside, the bleeding continues. You tell yourself you are still in control, that you are just letting it go gently. But in reality, you are slowly learning to abandon your inner world to maintain harmony with the outside world. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When the nervous system detects social signals that may lead to conflict or judgment, the amygdala, the center for processing fear, is activated. The body enters self-protection mode. One of the most common protective behaviors is adjusting speech to reduce the risk of negative reactions. This means that when you say, "I'm fine," your body is not lying, it is choosing what feels safest. But safety is not always the same as truth. And over time, that choice of safety becomes a habit of betraying yourself. And what matters is this. In this section, we are not yet talking about major consequences. We are simply observing the behavior, the subtle movements that happen every day. They continue without any external pressure. Because when inner authority has weakened, you do not need anyone to ask you to explain. You explain yourself. You do not need anyone to tell you to be easygoing. You play that role automatically. Self-betrayal becomes a reflex, a form of survival so refined that it is hard to detect. This explains why, in moments that seem insignificant, you feel as if you no longer belong to yourself. Because every time you say something that contradicts your true feelings, you send an invisible message inward. My emotions matter less than others' acceptance. When that message is repeated long enough, no one needs to teach you how to betray yourself. You become fluent in it. But at the same time, the subtlety of this behavior opens the door to change. Because if self-betrayal can begin in very small moments, then the rebirth of inner authority can also begin in equally small moments. What happens if you stop saying, "I'm fine"? What changes if you no longer soften your sadness to make it easier for others to hear? No longer smooth out your real feelings to fit them. And from the moment you dare to hold on to your truth, even in silence, a new structure begins to form inside you. A place where you no longer need permission to feel and no longer need explanations to exist. If there has ever been a moment when you smiled and said, "I'm okay," just to keep the peace, while inside you were quietly closing in on yourself, like a door afraid of the wind, leave one word in the comments to name that feeling. The word I suggest for you is unseen, because that is the moment when you are present in the conversation, yet disappear from your own heart, gently, quietly, and sadly enough that no one notices, except you. Number 5. The price to pay: exhaustion, anxiety, and living like a role. The more a person tries to be easy to understand, predictable and agreeable, the more exhausted they become inside. And Carl Jung once warned, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." When people do not dare to live with their real pain, they create another kind of pain. The pain of performing, the pain of needing to be understood, the pain of constantly controlling how they are perceived. This is the most wearing kind of pain. Psychologically, the act of constantly explaining has the same effect as forcing your body into clothes that are too tight. The clothes do not change, but you have to shrink yourself every day. At first, you may feel fine, but over time, breathing becomes difficult. Emotions are the same. When you force them into a socially acceptable mold, your nervous system has to work continuously to maintain control. The body remains in a constant state of alert, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen as difficult or heavy. And someone who lives in constant vigilance can never truly be at peace. They no longer live from their inner truth. They live from predictions about external reactions. That is the root of emotional exhaustion. Jung observed that many forms of anxiety and neurosis arise from a very simple mechanism. People lose connection with their inner world and live outwardly to an extreme degree. When someone has to constantly explain, they enter a state Jung called alienation from the self. They can no longer hear their inner voice, because the mind is always busy predicting what others will think. This is the deepest kind of tension, because it does not explode or shock, but slowly erodes a person from within. A viewer of the channel shared that she always feels the need to explain herself in her closest relationships. When her boyfriend asks why she seems distant today, she quickly justifies it by saying she did not sleep well. When she wants a quiet evening for herself, she provides many reasons so her partner will not misunderstand. When she lacks the energy to attend a gathering, she lists everything she has been through, as if to prove she did not mean to hurt anyone. No one forces her to speak, yet she tries to explain clearly, gently, logically, as if every emotion must be approved before it is allowed to exist. What exhausts her is not that others are too demanding, but that she has become the strictest censor of herself. She lives as if, without explaining, she would become a burden. One of the most dangerous consequences of excessive explaining is the formation of baseline anxiety, a constant, low-grade tension with no clear cause, yet always present. People begin to live in a state of waiting for feedback, as if the nervous system is perpetually awaiting judgment. Any conversation can trigger insecurity. Did I say something wrong? Did I make someone uncomfortable? Did they misunderstand me? The mind becomes a scanner, endlessly searching for mistakes. And a mind that is always searching for faults cannot live lightly. The sad part is that people who live this way are often praised by others. They are kind, gentle, considerate, well-mannered. No one sees the price they pay, No one sees their shoulders tense before they speak. No one sees how exhausted they are at night, unable to hear their own inner voice. Society likes agreeable people, but the price they pay is the loss of connection with their inner world. And that very loss is what makes them increasingly anxious, tense, and exhausted. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to become yourself, you must be brave enough to stop performing. Stop asking for permission. Stop explaining. And before you can do that, you must face the truth of this section. Every act of excessive explaining carries a price. A price that, if unrecognized, will be paid with your life energy, your inner peace, and your ability to sense your own truth. And only when you deeply understand that price will you see why the moment you stop explaining, even just once, everything inside begins to move. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because, for the first time, you step out of the role and step more honestly into yourself. Number 6. The moment of pause, when you stop explaining. If the price of living like a role has become clear, what follows is not immediate liberation, but a silent transitional moment where everything inside you begins to change without yet taking a new shape. And the paradox is this: when you stop explaining, peace does not arrive right away. It does not flood in like light or make you feel instantly lighter. Instead, it opens a strange emptiness that leaves you confused, even unsettled. Because for the first time in a very long while, you are no longer using words to soothe your own fear. Not because you do not want to share, but because your body is learning something entirely new. Standing still with real emotions without running toward familiar justifications. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He did not mean physical pain, but the instability you feel when stepping out of a psychological pattern that has followed you for so long. When you stop explaining, you lose your familiar support. You are forced to face your inner truth without any cushioning to protect you. Let me tell you the story of Emma Watson, a public figure admired for her intelligence and sensitivity. She shared that as she entered adulthood, she had a habit of explaining everything. Why she declined invitations, why she wanted quiet, why she felt uncomfortable at certain events. But at some point, she realized how tired she was of having to present every small need of her own. The first time she said no, without adding an explanation, she felt as if she had done something wrong. No one blamed her, yet her entire body reacted as if she had broken an old rule. She later said that moment felt like a strange emptiness, as if standing between two worlds, one she had lived in to please others, and a new one she did not yet know how to inhabit. The moment you pause and stop explaining is like stepping out of a room once filled with familiar sounds. You expect peace, but the first thing you hear is the echo of silence. It is not gentle. It is so vast that you do not know where to stand. This is the phase in which the nervous system relearns how to exist without using words to predict or defend. In that space, long-suppressed fears rise up. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being abandoned, fear that others will think you are cold. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you are leaving behind a survival mechanism formed in childhood. This brings to mind the image of a bird released from a cage after many years. You expect it to fly immediately, but it stands still for a long time. It looks at the open sky and hesitates, not because it does not know how to fly, but because its wings have grown used to limits. And so have yours. When you stop explaining, a new sky of truth opens, but your psychological wings have not yet adapted. So the first feeling is not freedom, but disorientation. That disorientation is not a wrong signal. It is the beginning of a new psychological structure. Jung called this phase the withdrawal of projections, when you reclaim parts of yourself that were previously handed over to others' reactions. But this withdrawal creates emptiness because you are not yet accustomed to placing emotions where they truly belong. You are not yet used to trusting inner authority. You are not yet used to standing on your own side without needing anyone's approval. The moment you stop explaining why you are sad, you feel awkward, unsure whether that sadness is allowed to exist. The moment you stop justifying why you refuse something, you worry others will think you are indifferent. The moment you simply say, "Today I need quiet," without adding any commentary, you feel strangely fragile. Not because silence is wrong, but because you are standing at the edge where an old system is cracking. If you are in this moment, do not rush to think you are wrong. Do not assume confusion or emptiness means you should return to old habits. No, it is simply evidence that your body is crossing a new threshold, one where inner truth finally has space to breathe. And from this fragile transitional phase, a natural question arises. What happens if you are patient enough to stand in that silence a little longer? What changes when fear settles and inner authority begins to return? These questions lead us into the next part, where the true power of stopping explanation begins to reveal itself. If you believe the world would be gentler if each person learned to stand still in their own truth, rather than explaining themselves to be accepted, please like the video to spread that message. Each like is not only support for the channel, but a reminder that we have the right to silence, the right to keep what is true inside, and the right to pause when the soul needs to breathe. Number 7. Silence as a form of psychological power. There is a kind of silence that does not come from fear or from hurt, but from a steadiness that is difficult to put into words. It is the silence of someone who no longer needs to protect themselves with explanations, no longer trying to soothe others' emotions, no longer rushing to fill gaps with justification. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. And only when inner conflict settles do you become strong enough to stop fighting for others' understanding." At that point, silence is no longer a void, but a very distinct form of power. Silence born of fear trembles, avoids, retreats. But silence born of steadiness has its own structure. It does not rush to explain. It does not seek to please. It stands still and lets truth speak for itself. This kind of silence causes those accustomed to controlling through relentless questioning, to pushing you into defensive positions, to lose their footing. They have nothing to cling to, no words to distort, no signals to manipulate. They encounter a surface so flat that all tactics fall into empty space. I once witnessed this in a young woman. She had a friend who frequently used emotional tactics to push her into taking responsibility for that friend's moods. "Why didn't you reply right away?" "What you did made me sad." Before, she would immediately explain, even when there was nothing to explain. But one day she simply replied, "Today I don't have the energy to communicate much." No justification, no emotional smoothing, no apology. And she remained silent. She said that in the first few seconds, Her heart raced. The other person did not know what to do except fall silent as well. And in that pause, she realized for the first time, power does not lie in words. It lies in not allowing anyone to pull you out of your calm center. Imagine a still lake. When someone throws a stone, ripples spread across the surface. But when untouched, it reflects everything without distortion. A grounded person is like that. The less they react, the more others are forced to confront their own behavior. Silence renders even the most subtle manipulations impossible, because it gives no material for them to operate. Art has long recognized the power of the unspoken. In the song The Sound of Silence, the line, "People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening," captures this paradox perfectly. The world is full of noise, yet rarely full of true presence. When you choose silence from steadiness, you step out of that vortex. You do not participate in conversations whose purpose is not understanding, but control. You do not answer questions meant not to seek truth, but to place you in a weaker position. And in relationships, silence becomes a wordless declaration. It says, "I am not participating in this game." It says, "I am not taking responsibility for emotions that are not mine." It says, "I know who I am, so I do not need to convince you." The less someone needs to justify themselves, the more clearly they show that their inner life does not belong to others. And this, even when unspoken, is always deeply felt by the other person. There are relationships in which silence collapses all mechanisms of manipulation within minutes, because those who are used to controlling through your confusion suddenly have no way in, no words to twist, no emotions to ignite, no gaps to exploit. Silence, in this case, is not avoidance. It is a refusal to participate in an old power system. But most importantly, silence as a form of power never comes from opposition. It comes from inner steadiness, from being strong enough not to react, clear enough not to explain, respectful enough toward yourself not to present reasons for your existence to anyone. And once you taste this kind of silence, you realize what words never could. It forces the world to adjust its rhythm to you, instead of you adjusting to it. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a space in which you stand fully on your own territory. And when you stop explaining, that power begins to radiate, gently but profoundly, until every relationship around you is forced to change with it. When you complete this journey, you will realize something that seems simple, yet transforms the way you move through the world. Silence is not retreat, but a return to your true position. No longer turning with others' gazes, no longer bending to fit expectations, no longer building layers of reasons to soothe the fear of being misunderstood. You stand upright in your own experience, and that is powerful enough to reshape every relationship around you. Stopping explanation does not make you cold, it makes you clear. It separates you from unnecessary dialogues, from unspoken tests, from situations where you once had to constantly present yourself to be at peace. And in that open space, you begin to hear the voice long blurred by the need for acceptance, the voice of the true self. From here on, you no longer live as an edited version designed to be easily understood, but as a human being with inner weight. If any part of this video made you realize you have spent too long living outside yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. The journey back to the power of silence is not about becoming unreachable, but about being present in life at your true rhythm, grounded, clear, and needing no justification to exist.